People often ask me, is there a medication for autism? Once you receive a diagnosis, what's next? How does that actually help you in your life? In my experience, effective help comes under three broad categories. So there's support, skills, and strategies. But ultimately, there is no one-size-fits-all approach, since that's ultimately the core of the problem. How do I find a specific solution that's going to work for me personally in my situation? And that's what Autistic Life Coaching aims to help with. So in this video, I'll share briefly what Autistic Life Coaching actually is. What do I mean by that? 5 life-changing concepts that we often explore with my one-on-one life coaching clients. And finally, stick around until the end and I'll share a bonus concept, which is actually my all-time favorite, and also a fantastic additional resource you might like to look into as well. Today's video is sponsored by the Shortform app, detailed yet concise summaries of a huge range of books and other resources. Hi everyone, Paul Mikolev here from Autism from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. So when people ask me if there's a medication to help with autism, they kind of miss the point a bit. And how I end up explaining it to people is that we all have roughly the same problems in life, roughly the same needs. We all need food and shelter and relationships and employment and other things like that. And so one way of conceptualizing autistic challenges is that the solutions that work for other people don't work for me. So maybe that's mainstream school works for a lot of people and doesn't work for me, or mainstream employment, or mainstream socialization, or other kinds of social conventions that fulfill a legitimate need for a lot of people but might be inaccessible for a variety of reasons. So what that means is life is essentially on hard mode, where you're not allowed to use the standard solutions that everyone else uses. And instead, I have to come up with my own unique solution for my own personal situation. And that is essentially what Autistic Life Coaching is aimed at helping with. You're the expert on your own life. Let's work out what's important to you, which may not be the same as everyone else. And then let's design specific strategies around how to meet your own goals in your life. So how is that different to regular life coaching? It's essentially the same in theory. In practice, the main difference is acknowledging common autistic patterns and challenges so as not to just keep trying generic good advice. So to give you some examples of what I mean by that, I'm going to share 5 life-changing concepts that are not immediately obvious to the neurotypical population, but that make a huge difference in acknowledging and accepting yourself and working with what you've got and working with that reality to achieve your goals. So concept number 1 is that every strength is a weakness. Sometimes it can be tempting to divide our skill set into what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses. And what I find is that they're a lot more linked than that most of the time. So in my case, personally, I'm really good at analyzing and optimizing. That's a fantastic skill set, and I easily found a good engineering job with that. But if that's my default, I'm tempted to analyze and optimize everything in my life. And in some situations, like relationships, then my skills of analyzing and optimizing might not be the best strategy in those kinds of situations. But there's a saying that if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so in that sense, my biggest strength has led to my biggest weakness because I'm less likely to practice those other skills because I'm so good at analyzing and optimizing. So concept number 2 is a little bit related to that, is that there is no one best strategy. In real life, success usually comes through the integration of opposite ideas. For example, is it better to be really organized or is it better to be really flexible? The answer is you can definitely be too organized, too rigid, and at the same time, it's also possible to be way too flexible and have no structure in your life. So through the integration of all of these different parts of ourselves, I can sometimes be structured and sometimes be flexible and sometimes use one skill set and sometimes use a different skill set and sometimes use one strategy and sometimes use a different, more appropriate strategy for that situation. So concept number 3, following on from that, is that autistic social skills do exist, but they're probably quite different from the traditional social skills you may have been taught. So this can be absolutely life-changing if you're realizing this for the first time. But what if it's possible to be actually authentically myself and not mask and be socially appropriate and successful at the same time? It turns out that conformity and masking on one side is basically the same thing as saying, I am going to be authentically myself and I'm not going to change for anyone. They are essentially two sides of the same coin. And so if we can find a way to integrate them both together, we can get the benefits of both rather than the isolation that can come from either masking and conforming on one hand, or radical individualism on the other hand, and removing myself from society because I feel like no one could understand me. The fourth useful concept is to distinguish between black and white thinking and more complex ways of seeing the world. And we can actually use this idea to help explain some of the previous concepts we've just been looking at. So on the one hand, we can look at things like an either-or situation. And on the other, we can ask, well, what happens if we have both black and white at the same time? And the answer is we have some kind of grayscale image. That is what a grayscale image is. It's a whole bunch of black and white dots all put together. And when they come together in that particular way, we can see a much more detailed image. And if we apply this thinking to itself, we can recognize that sometimes black and white thinking is actually really useful. The advantages of black and white thinking is that it's really simple and really easy to understand. And it can often be a really good starting point. For example, in my emotional intelligence training, when I'm helping people to identify their own emotions, sometimes a good place to start is, okay, you're not sure how you're feeling. That's really challenging for you to name it and feel it. Okay. Is it good or is it bad? Is it positive or is it negative? And then once we identify, okay, so it's some kind of negative feeling, great. Now we can start to get a little bit more nuanced from that. But in the beginning, we just want to get some way of starting to explain the situation. So we're going to use the idea of black and white thinking, binary categories, to help start us off. Concept number 5, and I'm just realizing how long this video is going already, and I haven't even got to the bonus concept yet. So I'll try to be brief, and maybe I can do a follow-up video to go into this one in more detail, because it probably could be an entire 20-minute video just by itself. It's the concept that short-term goals and long-term goals have incredibly different properties, and it's often really helpful to identify, is what I'm doing a short-term goal, like a band-aid solution, or is it a long-term goal, something that I'm constantly working towards? Even if I never get there, I'm definitely wanting to work towards it. And the reason that's so important is because very often the strategies that work for short-term goals are also really, really bad strategies to achieve your long-term goals, and vice versa. So instead of going into too much more detail, I might leave you with that one to think about. But to give you a really good example, there's a really classic problem in game theory called the prisoner's dilemma. So if you're interested, you can look that up. The concept is that you and an accomplice have been charged with some horrendous crime, and you need to decide, do I blame my accomplice so that I can go free? Or do I insist that they're innocent, hoping that they will insist that I'm innocent also, and then we don't have to go to jail? This really needs its own video, so I'm not going to go into more detail on that. If I create a video one day, I will link it somewhere so that you can get much, much more depth into this question, because it's such a powerful concept in life coaching. I probably end up talking about this with almost every client when we're trying to identify what our goals are and the best strategy to reach them. So number 6, my favorite bonus concept. It's a little bit difficult to explain at first, but basically there is a high chance you've been using your brain wrong. There's actually a fantastic book that explains this really well. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And if you'd like a fantastic summary of the book, then you're really going to love this week's video sponsor, the short form app for book summaries. So I'll leave a link below if you want to get a free 5-day trial and check it out for yourself. But essentially they have an incredible library of books and other resources that have been accurately and concisely summarized. So you can read a 1-page summary or even detailed chapter summaries of influential books like the Thinking Fast and Slow that I just talked about. I personally love it as a really great way of getting quick, accurate information so that I can understand a topic at a high level and then better decide, well, what is the next book that I'm going to add to my reading list? So make sure you check out the short form app if you think you might be interested. But let's go back to this claim that I made that you're using your brain wrong. What do I mean by that? That's quite provocative. What do I mean by that? Well, as outlined in this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, we have two systems, is the way that the book describes it. My simplified way of explaining it is we have an emotional brain and a cognitive brain. And the emotional brain is like an elephant, and the cognitive brain, the logical brain, is like a little human rider on top of this elephant. Now, when the systems are working well together, you have a little rider directing the elephant, and the elephant is doing all of the really heavy lifting. And the rider is just directing where the elephant should go and what it should do. I have noticed in myself and in a lot of other autistic people, we tend to have a really, really strong rider. Like imagine this massive, strong guy who can actually push the elephant around if he wants to. So if I'm able to do that, the temptation is, instead of trying to train this elephant that's being a little bit belligerent and not really doing what I want it to do, instead, I'm just going to use my brute strength, brute force, to actually get things done myself, rather than get a better relationship with the elephant so that we can work together as a team. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there because this is such a deep topic, and I literally wrote an entire emotional intelligence course around this. So I'll try and address it more in a later video. But I hope you've found this video helpful today. Check out autismfromtheinside.com.au for more info on emotional intelligence training and autistic life coaching. I feel like I need a whole dedicated page to all of the amazing books that I want to recommend you. If you happen to be interested in this topic half as much as I am, definitely check out the short form app if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks again for watching. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on the 5 concepts I shared today, if they've made sense for you or made a difference in your own life. And I will see you again next week. Bye.